there's a series of sort of different crystallizing events going on here that no one has words for. And so it's going to be difficult to articulate. One of which is that the economy is almost entirely artificial. It's really a wonder that the economy has made it this far and the housing markets have, because almost any metric you'd look at besides total GDP or the stock market has collapsed precipitously. Um, and the reasoning is the government can just print infinite money, and the entire global order is a shared bluff. We just haven't called it yet. Um, and so they're maintaining the bluff, and so you have these weird outsized effects like the 50-year loan. And another thing as well is I think, and this is something I only realized in the last few months, most people today's identity is purely based off social status, and so they need to get the house, they need to go into the dating game, they need to work extra hours because that's their identity and they don't have another reset button. And so you see these sort of status spirals get out of control because there's no reset button. And it's it's not a good situation. And I don't think this can last another year, because next year the interest on our debt is going to be more than defense and Medicare combined.
Yeah, it's one of those things where this is one of those problems where the libertarians are right, but they don't understand the implications of their own being right. So you're absolutely correct that the debt, financing our whole economy is fake. Inflated money, markets are completely artificial at this point. These are all things that are absolutely true. And so kind of the libertarian idea is, well, we just kind of cut these things back and everything will kind of right itself. But honestly, you can't cut these things back without basically having an armed revolution, right? Like the system is our problems are increasingly regime complete, right? Like every aspect of them is woven into every other aspect, holding up this kind of fugazi that we're all pretending is a real system that we should follow. And Oswald Spengler, of course, talks about this in his cycles of civilizations. This is the time of money power. This is the time of oligarchy. This is the time where people are trapped in these extended abstract decisions. Your late civilizational phase is one in which the animating spirit is gone and the only thing left is those like rigid moral systems that we talked about instead of the animating religion itself. And his solution, the one he believes is inevitable, is the great man of history, the Caesar, the conqueror that breaks through the money power situation. And the more you look at things, it's hard to deny that doesn't there seem, because if you look, for instance, Elon Musk just went back on his H-1B horse again. This is a guy who has talked about how demographics are destiny and you can't let mass immigration take over Europe and all these things. But for some reason, every time it's time to solve a problem, the solution is more managerialism, more H-1Bs, more placement migration. But it's like he knows there's a problem to his own solutions, but he can't think of any other type of solution because that's just the way a man who has made his living and been, rose to power in that way. That's the only way he can address issues and problems. Do you think that ultimately we have to break out of this frame? Is that the only way forward? Is there any way to step off of this road or find another solution to this problem?
I think Sam Francis covered this well with Leviathan and his enemies. He said the end point of the Leviathan would be Caesarism. And I agree. Amaury de Riancourt is a similar author who wrote a book comparing this cycle to the fall of the Roman Republic in the 50s. And he said the same thing. It's There's a staggering absence of imagination today. And I think that's because imagination is it's dependent on a kind of connection to the spiritual and the divine that we've utterly suppressed. And I say that in a more sort of broad sense than the way an Abrahamic culture would. If you go to ancient Greece or India, there's these ideas, these sort of like different types of consciousness you pull from. But in modernity, we've shut ourselves off from anything that's not very material. So that makes creativity nigh impossible. And so it's really staggering that we are a civilization which is very obviously dying. and we can't even imagine not dying because this is entirely self-enforced. A century
Mhm.
ago, the West dominated the world. It was the greatest civilization ever, and it lost due to its lack of any sort of I don't even know what word to use, but we did this to ourselves, and we lack so little imagination. We can't even imagine a world where we don't die. So there's this sense of inevitability to this, to a profoundly non-inevitable thing. And this is one of the parts I find most deeply frustrating, that all of this was utterly self-enforced. This was, if we look for what caused this failure of Western civilization, yes, you could say there was Soviet infiltration, you could say there's certain interest groups, but fundamentally, this was brought on us by us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, is it some level the hyperstition problem where the more we speak about it, the more we make it inevitable, we summon it into existence? What we're the perennialists, right? That simply civilizations must move through this life cycle, and that's even though there's no obvious external cause as to why we should be arriving at this point, we've kind of just hit the internal trigger, in the same way that every plant eventually dies and wilts and dies. Like, was this truly inevitable? Are we summoning it now? Is there a way to turn this around, as you say, if it is actually imminently avoidable, or have we set ourselves too far down this path? Whether it's our fault or not, is there just no turning back at this point?
I made a quote saying, "You're going to die anyway, so it's better to die rich than poor." And what I mean by that is that all life forms die, humans die, nations die. Um, but you can do more stuff before you die, and that's largely good. And you look at these historic cycles where the 250-year cycle for empires rising and falling. Start of the British Empire was 1750, end was 1950. The Arabs started under Muhammad in 650. They died a little after 900. The Spanish Empire started in 1500 and ended in the late 1700s. So it's a fairly consistent theme. And you look back at the founders who clearly knew that American democracy and their regime would fail at some point. They dropped a lot of veiled symbols. They made a lot of references to classical authors who definitely knew this stuff. And so the founders knew that they were operating sort of in time and this wouldn't last forever. And they were complete geniuses at structuring the American Republic in a decentralized way so that at the time of the revolution, we could have split up into a series of independent countries. Pennsylvania and Virginia could have had 50 years of wars over the West, but they didn't because the founders were able to fuse the country together. And so rather than fighting each other and fizzling out in the Great Plains, the Americans made it to Afghanistan and Japan and Somalia and became the de facto rulers of most of Europe. And that's very impressive. But it's interesting how the natural order has its own aims and it uses your best advantages against you. And it's really stark because I'm Gen Z, so I'm pretty young, but I've seen this happen to me in my real life where 2000s, we were such a staggeringly arrogant and self-satisfied society, but then all of our advantages were turned against us. Our huge systems, our interconnected global trade networks, the urbanization, all of those things were turned against us. So now we have a society where the urban populations are the ones who can't procreate. The cities were our great pride and advantage before, but that very same thing was turned against us. So next year will be 250 years since the American Revolution. We had the full cycle, but because we were so rich and successful, the natural order turned our best advantage against us. So we still hit the 250 years. And that's both confusing and sort of warped, but it also fits with just what you know about history.